My name is Anthony Battaglia, and this is my presentation for Ethical and Professional Issues in Engineering. I am a rising sophomore at Notre Dame, and without further ado, let's begin. So a little bit of context for the incident to start. Mr. Wesley Barnes was in Thailand for a work trip, and at the hotel he was staying at, he wanted to bring in his own alcohol. However, the restaurant part of the hotel didn't really allow for that, but they said that they could let him if he was willing to pay a $15 corkage fee. However, Mr. Barnes got upset, decided to argue with the waitstaff about it, and eventually the manager ended up getting called in. There was still a little bit more discourse there, but in the end the manager ended up waiving the fee. But Mr. Barnes was still upset about the whole thing. Because of this, he ended up going on to write a lot of negative reviews on TripAdvisor's website about the hotel. They were persistent and seemed pretty overly exaggerated. For example, among some of the reviews were claims of the staff being treated like slaves, some racist comments about the manager being from the Czech Republic and thus being like unfriendly and cold, and a lot of stereotypes, as well as some general complaints about like, oh, how this waitstaff was never happy to serve anybody, when in all fairness, I don't think many people would be happy to serve a guy like Mr. Wesley Barnes. But moving on, the hotel got upset about all of his reviews due to their over-exaggeration and just the sheer number of them, and because of the fact that they saw a massive decline in people booking hotels rooms in their resort, as well as a lot of people calling up and being like, hey, is such and such rumor that I heard really true? And a little bit more context is that the way the hotel retaliated is by using Thailand's anti-defamation laws. These are called the lèse-majesté, and it is one of the harshest anti-defamatory laws in the world. It applies to the monarchy, businesses, companies, essentially any big group that's powerful, and it is very broad and very vague, which means it gets misused very often. As you can see, there's a little list there of all the different things it covers, but in reality, if the big powerful corporation goes to court, they're gonna win. That's just kind of how Thailand's court systems work. An example of this is there was a chicken farming company that horribly mistreated their workers, and so the workers tried to unionize, go to court, and essentially sue for damages and money. However, because of the anti-defamatory laws, it doesn't matter if what the person's saying is true or not. All that matters is that you're going against a big entity. So all of the unionized workers, well, their attempt at unionization, all of them were jailed and fined. Currently, there are protests going on to try to fix this and get some more free speech for the people, but at the moment, it's not really doing much. As far as stakeholders go, there is, of course, Wesley Barnes, because he faced jail time and fines. He also could have been stuck in a foreign country's jail, which is definitely no fun for anyone. There was the Seaview Resort Hotel, who lost business, gained a poor reputation, and was given the red badge on the TripAdvisor website. And then there's TripAdvisor, who, depending on their actions, could have either been blamed for not helping Mr. Barnes and lost the trust of their customers, or do what they did and take Mr. Barnes' side, but then lose the trust of the hotels that would advertise themselves on their website. Also, they had to pay Mr. Barnes' bail. But next thing up is the timeline, and to your right is that little badge I mentioned that kind of pops up and it's like, hey, this is a hotel you might not want to go to. But quick little timeline is Mr. Barnes went to the hotel, caused a commotion, got scolded for it, went on to post negative reviews. Hotel asked him to stop. He wouldn't. Police were involved. Barnes was jailed, told he had to pay a fine or face 2 years in prison. And then TripAdvisor got him out on bail, made a little negotiation meeting, but then pulled out on their side of the meeting and ended up giving the badge when they promised they wouldn't. Now, before I go into talking about what should and shouldn't have happened and the rights and wrongs in this, I want to talk a little bit about different types of ethics and how that impacts what we're going to be talking about. So descriptive ethics is kind of talking about the reality of things, whereas normative ethics is talking about the ideal version of things. So like, for example, ideally, everybody should get food. Like, everybody should get food, everybody should get water, but in reality, that's just not possible. There isn't enough food, there isn't enough water, there isn't enough way to transport it to everybody. Another example is like, for example, the principles of communism, where it's from each's ability to each's need. However, in that case, the reality of it is, how are you going to motivate people to work? So it's just kind of like differences like that. But the main questions or issues I want to talk about is, what is the best outcome and what steps needed to be taken to get there? That'll be addressed on the next slide. Then there's the question of whether or not TripAdvisor should have stayed loyal to its customer, or if they should have respected the hotel's rights under their cultural and custom laws. And then the final question I'm going to be talking about is, does the answer to this lie in considering things relative to cultural laws and customs, or is there a clear-cut answer that is always right? So for that last question, I would say that this is pretty clear-cut. There is an answer that will be right and applicable in most situations. And as for whether or not TripAdvisor should respect the free speech or the cultural customs, I'm going to side with free speech, because I believe there are certain basic human rights, the whole American shtick, and free speech is something that I think everybody should have access to. Now, for what the real meat and bones of this is, how it should have happened. So if we're going to talk about the normative side of things, number one, Mr. Barnes just shouldn't have been a tool. He should have had some common decency to him. Number two, Thailand shouldn't have the easily abusable laws that they have. Number three, the hotel shouldn't abuse the laws. And number four, TripAdvisor shouldn't have been like, oh yeah, we'll do this, and then did something else. But in reality, there are going to be jerks. Mr. Barnes just happens to be one of them. I think he should be fined or jailed for what he did. Most likely fined. I think jailing is a little bit much. But the people of Thailand should definitely continue in their efforts to try and gain free speech. All you can do in a situation where you have a dictator is keep retaliating or hope that some other power comes in and saves you, but that's not always a great thing. And then the hotel, in reality, they should have just not abused the laws, and they should have tried to go for a more tame repayment from Mr. Barnes. Maybe asked for a little bit less money, or just jailed them for a week to kind of scare him, get him to realize the gravity of the situation. And finally, TripAdvisor shouldn't have said, oh yeah, we're gonna do everything you ask us to. And then as soon as Mr. Barnes is out of the country, they're like, haha, nope. So TripAdvisor should have just been a lot more transparent and honest with what they're gonna do. And this is how I'd assign the blame personally. I'd say the Thai government for making crappy laws gets about 20%. TripAdvisor for kind of backing out on their word gets 10%. I gave them less because at the end of the day, they're a company. It's their job to deliver for their customers. Seaview Resort, I gave the same amount as the Thai government, because at the end of the day, similar to TripAdvisor, they're a company. Their goal is profit. If there's a law that they can't abuse, it's unrealistic to expect them not to. Normatively, absolutely, it should be a no, but descriptively, it's what happens in real life. And then I gave Wesley Barnes 50% because this all could have been avoided if he just would have not tried to bring his own alcohol. If when he was told he couldn't, he just said, oh, okay. And overall, if he just wasn't an entitled asshole. But yeah, these are the sources I used, and that is my presentation.